All right, good morning everyone and welcome to this HiQ Digital Knowledge Tour webinar. My name is Asmo Urpilainen and I'm the Director for Product Development here at HiQ. And today what we're going to be covering is basically our very own integration platform, FRENDS, and how it can help you basically achieve your digitalization and integration goals. But before we get started, I'd like to advertise our Digital Knowledge Tour series, which means that we'll be having the first one of the series today regarding the FRENDS integration platform, but next week we will have a hyper automation related webinar held by Antti Toivonen, who's going to be talking about how to incorporate both integration and robotics process automation together to achieve what we are calling a hyper automation platform. But today, what we're going to be covering is FRENDS, and what we basically have in store for you is a little bit of background. So why should we care about integration and integration platforms in general, and what do actually integration platforms as a service mean, and how can they help you, and go through a couple of use case examples here. One from an imaginary organization's perspective, where we're going to be solving a problem relating to a web shop implementation. After that, we'll have a short look through on the FRENDS platform side of things. So how does FRENDS actually work? How does the architecture look like? What does the development actually look like, and how does it function? And moving over to a real customer example case, to a customer who we helped in the near past here, called LähiTaxi, where basically we built a digital transformation platform then, and basically digitalized the whole taxi business for that customer. And finally, we are finishing off with a hands-on demo of the FRENDS platform itself, where we're going to be building one example integration from scratch to look at the kind of development aspect, monitoring aspects, governance and things like that, with the platform actually live there and from one of our demo environments. And finally, we have a Q&A section in the end. So if you have any questions during the webinar, just please utilize the Teams Q&A functionality that you can find in the Teams user interface, and basically post your questions there, and we will go through as many as we have time for in the end. But let's just jump straight into the actual agenda today. So why are we here today? And usually, of course, what we're trying, or usually in webinars, what we're trying to do is tell you kind of why we are here. But what I actually want to do today is maybe reverse the questioning here a little bit and try and present the kind of problematic here regarding integrations in 2020. So we've basically ended up in a situation that organizations have more and more IT systems and solutions and applications and whatever to support their business, and we all know that IT spending goes through the roof, and more kind of digitalized solutions and products are on the roadmap for most organizations nowadays. And it's basically a reality nowadays that compared to the days of the past, where you could have one monolithic ERP to solve all of your IT problems, that's almost impossible to do today. But rather what's happened is that there are microservices, RPA solutions, mobile and web applications, you have software as a service solutions hosted in the cloud, and you have databases on premise, and you have basically every which way that the systems can have basically fractured and split across all of these different environments and technologies, and even kind of ways of using. So you might have some solutions for one particular part of the organization, and a completely different set of solutions for another branch of the organization. So what does all of this actually mean? That we have this ever increasing number of solution systems and applications to support our business. This can result in an uncontrollable IT landscape, where you might actually lose some data, or you're not aware of where your data is being located at any given moment. You might create these sort of unreliable connections between different systems, where you might get data corruption, or the system might not just work at all if the integrations are not set up correctly. And most importantly, of course, trying to manage and run and operate this sort of uncontrollable environment where all the solutions and services have been fractured between multiple different environments can be hugely and especially of course money consuming from that perspective. And of course this is the initial problem that we are trying to solve with an integration platform such as FRENDS. And basically to maybe give you a little bit of an idea of the kind of scope of these sort of problems that might arise, that actually Gartner estimates that in 2020, almost 50% of IT development spending will be spent on integrations. And of course, this means that whenever you're building almost any sort of an application or solution, there will be integrations incorporated into that application, because nothing can work in a void anymore, and everything needs to be as highly connected as possible. But of course, that's why we have the iPaaS, or integration platform as a service, to solve these issues and problems for us. And what does the iPaaS actually do for us? Well, the iPaaS tears down silos inside the organization by basically connecting the data and applications in whatever environments might exist at a given customer or given organization. So that means that both cloud, ground, internal network, whatever you have kind of incorporated there, all of those systems and data sets and sources can be connected together to form basically a unified integration catalog, which of course then bridges of course cooperation between multiple organizational units, but most importantly allows the customer to have this holistic approach and view of everything that they have installed, and how are those systems communicating and connected together between one another. Well, of course, iPaaS, then mainly, of course, enables cost savings from a development perspective, but most importantly, besides speeding up the actual development work, the most important bit here is to reduce the amount of operations overhead. So the iPaaS provides the kind of governance layer out of the box for all of your different connected systems and solutions, and helps you track down those problem situations or analyze what's actually happening in your IT landscape as a whole. But then, of course, we shouldn't forget about the kind of new business side of things. So whenever we are creating any sort of new business models or developing new applications for the front end, or even creating automated business processes, the iPaaS is there to basically speed up the development of all of these services by providing you with ready-made components that someone else has basically done the work for you, and you will simply configure how to utilize those ready-made components for your use case. And then finally, of course, the kind of major benefit here for many customers is to enable the onboarding of new systems and services so that they can be seamlessly integrated or attached to the existing system landscape and existing business processes. And this is actually what we're going to be taking a look at next. So basically going through a case example about an imaginary organization who has a web shop where they're actually selling goods that they're producing, and they've bought this web shop as a service from the cloud. So you could imagine Webify or Shopify or Weebly. I'm sorry about the mix up there. And there are a bunch of these kind of web shop platforms available that you could start utilizing and selling your goods on the internet. But soon that organization realizes that actually what they want to add to their web shop is an SMS alert functionality. So that would mean that if new products come available, they would like to alert their customers via SMS, or when the customer order is being processed, they would like to keep the customer up to date via SMS messages about the state of the order being processed. But this basically means that now we have a business need that needs to be incorporated in the web shop, which is now being bought as a service, so as a SaaS solution from the cloud. So that basically means that the organization now has two options. So the first one is, of course, buy the new feature included in the web shop as development work from the web shop supplier. And in many cases, this is usually slow and expensive, and sometimes it's even impossible if you're dealing with a large enough software as a service provider. They rarely let you customize or kind of go under the hood and change anything in their system, since they want to deliver that standard software, that SaaS solution, which should be the same for everyone. But of course, the customer still wants to have his SMS capability. But that's of course where the iPaaS comes in. So rather than trying to add that functionality into the system itself, the customer can choose to use an integration solution such as FRENDS to onboard and attach or integrate that new functionality to the web shop. So that actually means that now rather than developing your own SMS capability and setting that up, the organization could simply acquire or buy a ready-made SMS service from the cloud and now use the integration solution or iPaaS to actually connect that SMS service directly to the web shop without having to do any changes on the web shop level. So that means that now we can actually isolate the web shop completely from the SMS functionality, and the integration platform puts these two together to make basically a larger whole as the sum of its parts in a nutshell. And this is, of course, one of the main benefits that we want to provide with FRENDS. And what we, of course, are doing with the FRENDS integration platform is that we want to provide at least 50% faster development of these sorts of new services, or compared to kind of creating your own feature for the SMS functionality compared to utilizing a ready-made service. So these are the ways that we are actually capable or enable the customer, enable you to speed up the development process, and of course reduce costs in the development phase quite drastically. One key thing that we are of course also doing with FRENDS, so as a modern integration platform as a service, and especially actually we are calling FRENDS an enterprise integration platform as a service, which means that we are now actually able to provide all your integration capabilities and needs, which in this case could be an example from the web shop. So connecting an existing system with another existing solution is considered from our perspective to be part of this traditional integration landscape. But as an enterprise integration platform, we also provide you with basically business process automation capabilities and API management capabilities. So you get all of these sort of tools into your integration palette from just one single solution, FRENDS, and everything works seamlessly between APIs, integrations, process automation, and it's basically the same toolkit regardless of the use case that you're trying to solve with FRENDS. We of course also want to kind of really highlight the low-code approach that we take to integration development with FRENDS. So later down the line in the webinar, we'll actually go through the simple FRENDS demo to kind of showcase how the platform actually works and how the low-code approach is bringing that efficiency, bringing that speed, bringing that faster development cycle with the approach that we've chosen. And of course, finally, as a modern integration platform, we need to be able to fit into any sort of a customer scenario or solution, or any sort of a customer environment and setup. So that means that we're capable of working across all the kind of public cloud providers, so Azure, Google, AWS, and so on, but also tackle all ground environments, so the traditional on-premise servers, be they Windows or Linux or their Linux counterparts, and connect all of these different points that we need together to form this sort of a nice platform that you can actually then start working on. And if we now jump a little bit kind of into the actual nuts and bolts of how do we now bring these benefits to you. So basically we've built FRENDS utilizing what we are calling distributed architecture, which means that now when you have this situation that you have your own on-premise network where you might have a data warehouse and a warehouse management system, you might have your marketing and CRM systems basically bought as a service from AWS, and you might have, let's say, your ERP and workforce management in the Azure cloud. So how do we now solve this problem of these different systems actually splitting between these environments, but they still need to work together as seamlessly as possible? So our solution is to have one central control panel or user interface. And this is, of course, the platform as a service portion of FRENDS. So basically a web application where we do all of our development work, monitoring, governance, we change our passwords, whatever that we need to do basically regarding the integration big picture as a whole is centralized under the single control panel, but the control panel itself doesn't actually execute any integrations and doesn't actually transfer any data between systems. But in our architecture and terminology, what do we want to do is we want to attach what we are calling agents to that central control panel or user interface, and the agent can now be deployed, like we discussed, to any public cloud provider or on Windows Linux servers in the traditional on-premise environment. And now that we have the capability of actually deploying the execution engine of the integration platform into various different locations at once, that means that now we can simply choose which parts of what integration should be executed in what environment. And our ideology here is that this, of course, now enables us to create all sorts of integrations that span multiple different environments, connecting those separate systems in AWS and, for example, the ground environment, where we could, for example, now create an integration process or integration solution, which could start when we receive, let's say, a new contact in our marketing system. And the first step in that integration could be to update that contact into the CRM system. And all of this would be happening now locally within the AWS cloud of the customer. But after updating the CRM, we could actually take all of that contact data from the marketing and CRM systems and send it through the central control panel to another agent that we have installed in another network location or data center, and actually, for example, now use the data from the CRM and marketing systems locally here in the on-premise or ground environment, and let's say insert that into the data warehouse. So this architecture allows us to bring the integration execution capability close to where we need it so that we can actually keep and maintain all the security that we have built to kind of encompass our different environments, either in the cloud or on premise, and not have to worry about do we open up firewall ports here and there, and how is the data connected now from, let's say, AWS to the Azure, because we can now use the integration platform to pass data from one execution agent to another, and then actually handle all the integrations as close to the systems as possible where we need that integration capability. And if we take a look at this same picture from a little bit of a different perspective, so if this is the way that we want to bring out or bring the integration capability to where it's needed and still have the option of controlling and managing and developing everything from one single centralized location, and we turn this picture a little bit on its head. So we're following a same kind of color-coded pattern here, where green is something that humans interact with, blue is now the place where we're actually executing the integration, and then purple are, of course, the systems that we're connecting towards. So how do actually the FRENDS integrations look like? And this is a pretty good example of a fairly common integration use case that we might have, where we are actually utilizing what we are calling BPMN 2.0, which is a global standard of describing these sort of business processes from a technical perspective. And what that means is that all of our integrations, be they APIs or long-running business automation processes, or just simple file transfers or data uploads, all of them follow the same pattern where we have what we are calling a trigger. So some way for us to actually start the integration processing, and after which we simply configure and use the low-code approach in FRENDS to specify the order in which different steps of the integration should happen and implement any needed additional logic there, which might include error handling, loops, business decisions, queue processing, whatever that we need to actually fulfill the requirement for that particular integration use case. And we are composing this integration flow basically using ready-made connectors, which we provide you with a huge library of these basically pre-built integration snippets, which you can think that are reusable and provide a simple functionality from the integration's point of view, such as reading the contents of a file or creating a new order to, let's say, an IBM mainframe, as an example. So now what we actually have to do from a development perspective is simply configure the order in which we want to call these reusable integration functionalities and then implement the rest of the logic to make the integration happen as a whole. And maybe if we take this one step further and go through a real use case example here from a customer called LähiTaxi, which is the largest private taxi provider here in Finland. And maybe a year back, or actually 1.5 years back, we started this digital transformation project for the customer, where we actually digitalized the whole taxi business behind open APIs. So it's a really good example of kind of all the capabilities of FRENDS kind of mashed together, where now in the cloud we are actually able to publish a set of open API endpoints. So you could imagine that there would be APIs to order a taxi, get a quote for a ride, update your, let's say, taxi preferences. Do you want to ride in a Mercedes or a Volvo? And all of these things that you need to actually run your taxi business in a digital form are encompassed and managed by the FRENDS API management capabilities here in the cloud. But more importantly, now the customer was in a situation that they had a really old legacy ERP system to manage the taxi rides. They were missing a CRM system completely, and they had no mobile payments capabilities. So now actually combining the API management capabilities of FRENDS, where we can expose those digital services in the cloud, we are now also orchestrating and creating the automations here on the ground environment or on-premise environment, where we basically automate the work of that person who used to be sitting here, basically sitting behind or next to a phone and waiting for someone to call the taxi center and then type in the address to send that taxi to that location. So now we actually automate the work of that human being completely. So now we can scale in the digital world, as FRENDS is now doing the work that used to be manual, but also we incorporated a CRM system and a payments capabilities to the API set that's now being used by multiple different organizations and, let's say, web applications, mobile software, and so on and so on. So now we actually put in all the different bits and pieces together here to form this sort of a really cool example of a finalized digital transformation project and solution. All right, we should move on to the actual brief demo here. So this is actually what the FRENDS user interface now looks like. And where we are now are at a tenant that we are calling a sales demo. And basically this will be the place where all the integration work and monitoring and everything relating to that will be performed. So you don't need any additional tools outside of the web application that we provide. And we, of course, don't have time to go through everything here today. But if we have an imaginary use case where, let's say, I want to retrieve product data periodically from our product management database, which in this case could be an SQL database or an AdventureWorks database for those who know what that is. And we want to take that product data and let's say update that into an XML web service. So basically retrieve products from an SQL database, send those to a web service that might be the back end of our web shop or the back end of our ERP, whatever the use case might be. But we need to now update this product data from the database to a web service. And if we start tackling this sort of an integration solution, I would go ahead and click the Create New button here in Friends, which takes me to what we are calling the process editor, which is the main place where we do all of our development work regarding our integrations. And you can see that here we are actually now using the BPMN notation to model out how the integration should function and what the logic behind the integration should be. So the first step I should be doing is naming my integration. So I'll just call this 01 product data from database to, let's say, XML web service. And of course, we can provide some additional information like versioning, descriptions, attached documentations, and things like that. But of course, the first thing that we need to do when we are designing any sort of a Friends integration is first to kind of model out or design the integration. And what this actually means is I can go ahead and start documenting and designing what my integration should do. And in our case, I of course know that the first step of my integration should be to retrieve new products from database. And after I know that I'm getting my products from my database, I know that I want to actually loop through each product. So I could say that let's do some processing for each product found. And then finally, the processing that we want to provide for each of the products that we found was to send the product as an XML to a web service. And finally, we can just close in our process here and be fairly happy with the design of how our integration looks like. But of course, the design here now is only half of the picture, and here is the link kind of between what business usually understand and is interested in. So business would like to know how the logic works, what's actually happening inside the integration that we are creating. But from a technical perspective, we still need to do the other part, which would now be the low-code configuration. And from our perspective, that's a fairly straightforward matter, which basically means that we select each step that we kind of designed into our integration flow and configure what should now happen in this particular step of the integration flow. And that would mean that I would, in this case, I know that it's going to be an SQL database. I could just search for an SQL task. So basically a ready-made connector that allows me to execute SQL queries against my chosen database. So what I actually need to do to kind of provide the low-code configuration for my execute query step here is simply to write my chosen SQL query. So I'm going to do select star from sales lt dot product, and well, maybe we'll do let's do top 100, so we don't empty the whole database. But of course, you could see that we could now add in any sort of where queries and basically support all transaction SQL that you could write here. But of course, also what we need to provide for our test task and step here is we need to tell it where the SQL server is located. So we need to provide a connection string to run this piece of reusable integration functionality. And I could, of course, just write my SQL server information directly here with my passwords and usernames, but actually rather I'd now like to do the first low-code reference here in Friends. So this actually means that wherever we are using the configuration here in the process editor of Friends, we are allowed to put in double curly brackets, which activate the low code functionality. And that means that actually inside the low code brackets here, we can have access to all the different data that we have available at this stage of the integration execution. But we also have access to all sorts of helper information or helper variables. So as an example, I could now actually choose to select the connection string as a reference from a central variable management functionality, meaning that we have what we are calling environment variables here to provide you with a way to centrally manage what should be the database in development, test, production, and we are of course encrypting those values and storing them securely. So if you use the same database in multiple different locations, you only manage those kind of keywords, usernames, passwords, and so on from one central location to help you out in that governance aspect that we were previously talking about. But now, of course, as a developer, what I'd like to do is create a test. So I'd like to run my example configuration here to see what would happen in real life if I now ran my integration so far. And I can see that the unit test execution here was successful. It took 172 milliseconds. And what we're getting back is basically a representation of the data in the database. And a good thing to note here that internally what we are doing in Friends is that we're actually managing and processing all the data in an SQL format, or actually, no, sorry, JSON format, which means that now because it's JSON formatted, we can actually start using all the data here directly with the low code approach that we have in Friends. So this means that what I could actually say is that for our loop, I want to now loop through each of the database rows that we get back from our database query. So I could actually say here hashtag result. So what I want to do is add a reference to the result of my previous retrieve new products from database, and basically now loop through each of the rows that we have available there and assign that to a variable called product. Because now, of course, in our final step here, where we want to configure how do we now send this product data to our XML web service, we simply go and replicate exactly the same functionality. So we search for an HTTP capable step here or task in the Friends user interface, and I can see that there's one for HTTP request. So I can select that, and of course the configuration looks quite similar. So now I just need to specify that yes, I want to send a message using the HTTP method post, and the address I want to send the message to should be http bin.org. This is just the testing service where you can actually send any data and it will just send that same data back to us. But the important bit here is to now notice the low code configuration where we specify that the message that we want to send should be of XML format, and our message structure should be like this, that we have one message element there, and inside the message element we have, let's call this ID, and we could add in, let's say, price, and finally let's add in color, but let's make the color with a U rather than O, and then finally we could have a timestamp. So basically we define the structure of the message that we want to send, and now we inject the data directly from here to the message in any position and combination that we want. So as an example, I could now add in the double curly brackets to activate the low code configuration option, use the hashtag to now access the product variable, and basically directly say that, yeah, for the ID element here, I want to get the product ID part, so I can simply add in the reference to the product ID field, which would now of course be 680, 706, and so on and so on. And now we simply kind of replicate this mapping functionality using the low-code approach for all of our different fields here. So we could add in, let's say, list price here. We could add in the, let's take the color here. And finally, as an example, what we could do is now also use C# code to enhance our configuration. So what we can actually do is just directly access all the C# and .NET code functionality to inject or manipulate the data somehow. So this could, for example, mean that we take the timestamp of when we are actually creating the message by simply just writing a piece of C# code to get the timestamp in a specific format, where we of course now end up in a situation where we have some dynamic code and then just references to the data in the database. So I would be fairly happy with my configuration. So I've created my new message that will be sent to my example service here. I've tested out my SQL query configuration. Everything seems to be working. So once I actually click here, create new process and activate it, my new solution will now appear here in the main integration catalog, along with all the other integrations I've created. And if I run my integration here, and actually let me change the log settings here to be everything. So if I run my integration here once, we can actually now take a look at the integration from a monitoring perspective. So I noticed, I can see that actually, yes, in the development environment, my new integration is actually running. There is one execution instance in my given time frame, and I can actually now jump inside the execution of this particular integration and have access to all the monitoring data that I have available here. So basically, now that this integration has been deployed and executed on an agent that we have installed and attached to our Friends user interface or control panel here, I can now see that when that agent executed the integration, we actually used this SQL query to a database that we have now hidden away. But of course, this was now the result of that query. And then what we want to do next is loop through each of the products in my integration execution. And you can, of course, see that, the product data is changing here as we move through the iterations of the loop. And finally, what we did is we used that data from the SQL query to create a new SMS or XML message that we sent to this URL address. And we can see that, we generated the timestamp and we mapped the ID, price, and color to the different fields inside our message. And of course, this is now how the integration would start to live its own life with included version control management. So I can actually go ahead in here, and maybe if I change my integration a little bit, so change this to, for example, be get as an example, we now automatically get new versions. So we have version 0.1.2. We can take a look at what's the difference between version 1 and version 2. And I can see that, the difference is that we changed the post to get here. We could actually now automatically deploy our solution to test or production with a specific version and start running and managing the integration throughout its life cycle now that we've actually developed and built it. But that's all we have time here today to go through the demo. But we probably have some questions there available. So Paulina, if please you could highlight some questions, or actually maybe you should just ask them out loud, and we can go through a couple, seeing that we have actually 7 minutes left in the webinar time.
Hey, so the question number 1, is it possible to connect product data management with CRM?
Yes, so of course, data management or any sort of kind of master data solutions in general are pretty typical integration use cases, and we do have ready-made connectors for most CRM systems and also most data management systems. But please just get in touch with us, and we can take a look at that on a closer and better schedule. Good.
Good. Another question: is FRENDS a low-code solution? Maybe you could tell more about it.
Yeah, so how we actually kind of or view the low code, and in that sense that this is kind of like what we take it or demonstrate it here, is that we do of course require you to have some understanding of technical level of how to create the messages, how to write the SQL queries, but then of course compare that to writing all of the code. So if I show you what's actually happening underneath here, so what's the added value that FRENDS is bringing besides the visual configuration, is of course that there's a whole bunch of code that we've implemented here as an open source library to actually provide that SQL execution capabilities. So you don't have to worry about this code, and we do it for you, and you can worry about the kind of important stuff, which is the SQL query in this case, for example. I want to thank everyone for their time, and definitely if any of this seems interesting to you, just get in touch with us here at HiQ and FRENDS. And just as a last advertisement as well, remember to sign up for the next week's hyper automation webinar as well. And we will of course have future digital knowledge tour webinars coming after that as well.